Hello, this is going to be a first look at FuturFusion's Migration Manager, a tool that's designed to migrate VMware virtual machines over to Incus clusters. I'm Stefan Graeber. I'm the project leader of Linux Containers, one of the maintainers of Incus, and also the CTO of FuturFusion. So my team at FuturFusion has been working on Migration Manager for around 6 months now. And the project has been public on GitHub for around a month. Just before going into more details, including a demo, let's just go quickly over what it is that FuturFusion is doing. So FuturFusion is a company whose focus it is to provide a private cloud platform that's based on Incus, specifically tailored and targeted at large businesses, and currently mostly focused on those that are moving from VMware over to an open source alternative. The solution we have is based on FuturFusion Cloud Hypervisor OS based image that runs on the bare metal and that runs Incus, which then integrates with our Operations Center, which handles provisioning, update management, global inventory for all of the clusters that are being deployed. We're working with deployments of several thousands Incus servers that are then put in hundreds of different clusters, and Operations Center keeps track of all of that where everything is running. Now, Operations Center itself is not published yet on GitHub. That should come in the next few weeks. But what is the Migration Manager. So as mentioned, the Migration Manager's goal is to connect to a potentially quite large VMware environment and look at all of the VMs running on there, and then start moving them to one or more Incus clusters. All right. So on Migration Manager itself, it's a project written in Go, released under the Apache 2 license, very much kind of shaped around what we've done for Incus in the past. It's completely open source, it's on GitHub. It provides a REST API, which then has clients for Linux, Windows, macOS, and a UI to also drive it. So without further ado, let's go look at how it actually works. All right, so switching over to a terminal here. I've got a machine that's got it installed but hasn't run it yet. So we can see Migration Manager D is the daemon, Migration Manager is the command line client. On top of that, we have some data already in place in Valley Migration Manager. Specifically, oops, just clean that up a bit. There we go. A config file that makes Migration Manager connect to an OpenID Connect provider. So that's to do easy centralized authentication. It can also do standard TLS type authentication, but most of our customers, they run a large scale environment. So that means centralized authentication, centralized authorization, and Migration Manager supports that the same way Incus does with OpenID Connect and OpenFGA. Then we've got the UI itself that's installed here. We've got certificates for a valid certificate in this case, so that when I show it through the web UI, there's no prompt about this is self-signed or unsafe, etc. And then there's a worker binary. I'm gonna go in a bit more details as to what that does in a tiny bit, but that needs to be present so that it can be uploaded into Incus. And lastly, a VMware SDK file. So that's the one thing we can't distribute directly with Migration Manager. That needs to be downloaded directly from Broadcom's support website. But that's the VMware Disk API SDK that's used to do the actual disk transfer. So that needs to be downloaded, put in place, and then we consume it automatically. All right, so that's what we have on disk. Now let's actually start this thing. So I'm just gonna start the daemon, provide it with its URL, and then what port I want it to run on. So I'm gonna start that, and then I can go look. Well, first of all, there are two pings at the bottom of my screen. Those are pinging to VMs running on VMware. And I'll keep pinging them throughout the entire process just to kind of show that what kind of downtime to look at effectively when things actually do start shutting down and starting back up on the Incus side. All right, here on the command line side, we can use the Migration Manager CLI to poke around, but there's obviously nothing in there. So the rest of the setup I'll do through the UI to kind of show that angle. But first, let's take a look at our source environment. So that's here. It's a VMware cluster. It's running on 3 physical machines. It's running a dozen or so test VMs that we have here, covering a good selection of operating systems, Linux distros, storage configuration that we use for testing. They're all connected to a VMware network, so they're all on the same L2 network, which then has been stretched into Incus, so that we can reattach the VMs to the exact same network they were on, including same IP address, same everything, so that there is no no impact to service. You don't need to readdress, you don't need to go and change any configuration. Everything just lands the same way it used to be once the migration is complete. Now, looking at the UI for Migration Manager itself, we've got sources, so that's your, in this case, the VMware cluster, targets, that's going to be the Incus cluster, then a list of instances, and after that, migration batches and a view as to what's going on through the queue. So first, I'm going to be adding a source, and I'm just going to say the UI is still very new, and there's still some rough edges here and there. We're going to see a couple of small ones as we add source and targets around how TLS is handled and authentication is handled, but that's being worked on. So provide the URL and the password. I don't know the server fingerprint, so that's where things will fail. When I submit, I get an error, which actually gives me the expected fingerprint. So I could go here and then provide it, and then things will work. We've got an open issue to turn that into a prompt instead, so you don't need to mess around with the error message. So submit, and the source is good, at which point it will automatically scan and import all of the VMs into our inventory here. And then we can go and do the target. So the target is gonna be a production cluster on production Incus cluster. So Zablicom. Authentication is gonna be OpenID Connect. So in this case, I submit that and we get another error message, this time including the authentication token. So we can see the connectivity status is waiting for IDC, and the error includes the URL that we need to go to. Again, that's going to be tweaked so that we don't need to do that. And I can just log in here, and this is going to update with effectively authentication being okay. So if we look at the source, we're good. Target, we're good. And we've got a list of instances. Now, at this point, nothing is migrating. We need to actually tell it that we want to migrate some stuff. Another thing that's going on is it also looked at the networks, and that's just in the CLI at this point. But we can go look at the list of networks that were detected. And in this case, we need to also provide it with a equivalent config on the Incus side so that it knows what network it needs to actually put the instance on. Otherwise, it will just default to what's in the default Incus profile. But in the environment I'm using right now, this is not right. So we need to actually provide that data. So this is just Incus network config data for anyone who has seen it before, which says that we need to connect it to the network called VMware and not to do any allocation for IPv4, IPv6 address. That's already all good. So we put that in place, and the rest we can go back in the UI and do from the UI. So next step is to define a migration batch. So we're gonna go here, can give it a name, select a cluster, and then provide details for what's the name of the project that we want to move to, what storage, and then put a filter to tell it what VMs we'd like to select. So I'm gonna filter based on the inventory path on the VMware side, which is effectively the folder, and select everything in the migration tests folder. Now, we can select a migration window. So for that, I'm gonna put the start time at around 10 minutes from now, slightly over 10 minutes from now. So let's do 2025. Then month is 3/11. The time in UTC is currently 20. Let's do 55:00 UTC. So again, that's about 5 minutes, about slightly over 10 minutes from now. Once this is defined, we can go and make sure that it's got the correct list of instances, which it does. And lastly, we can actually start that batch. Now, when we start the batch, it creates an entry for every one of the instances that needs to be moved. And in the background, it's gonna start downloading some artifacts. If we go look at our cache, it's downloaded that Windows driver ISO, which is used for the Windows VMs. And it's gonna be uploading, creating VMs and uploading the runner file, so the migration runner, and the ISO for Windows drivers into Incus. So right now you can see the state is creating VM. If we go look at the Incus cluster, you can see that they're all here. They actually got created and they're starting up now. They're not, so just to explain what's going on there, they're booting up from a tiny OS image that we call the migration worker. And that tiny image then connects back to the migration manager, gets some credentials to connect to ESX and start the disk transfer. So that's what's going on. They all booted, they all got an IP address, but they're not on their, like it's not the actual workload running, it's just a worker running. And we can see it, the reported progress there. So we're gonna, it's effectively doing an initial set of snapshots on the VMware side, doing a initial transfer pass for the data. And once that completes, it will, normally it would wait an hour and then do another pass, and then wait an hour and then do another pass, and do that until the maintenance window. In this case, our maintenance window is coming up in just a few minutes, so it's not gonna get to do 2 passes, but a bunch of those VMs will at least get to do a first one, and then we'll do a second one during the actual downtime window. So at this stage, if we go look at the VMware side, we can see a bunch of snapshots being created and deleted. That's all that's going on. On the VMware side, everything is still working as expected. So if we look at the bottom, both of the VMs are still pinging. There's no downtime whatsoever at this stage. It's just doing incremental disk transfers, making sure that we've got as much of the disk already transferred before we hit the maintenance window, at which point it will be allowed to actually shut down the VM, do one last pass on the disk, run through post-migration steps, things like injecting drivers, regenerating initRDs, tweaking fstab, that kind of thing, and then actually restarting the VM, this time running on Incus. So that's basically what's going on there. In this demo, I'm just using 12 VMs, and I'm just using a single source VMware vCenter and a single target Incus cluster. Production environments with our customers, we're usually looking at anywhere from 5 to hundreds of vCenters, kind of depending on how things were segmented, with targets being anywhere from dozens to hundreds of Incus clusters. And that also means keeping track of potentially hundreds of thousands of virtual machines throughout the process. Now, this is all quite doable for Migration Manager because it doesn't itself relay any data. All it does is really just API calls on different front, like it's talking to VMware on one side to get the list of instances, manage snapshots, do that kind of stuff. On the target side, it's connecting to Incus and can create instances, reconfigure them, reboot them, do that kind of thing. And the migration runner that's running directly inside of the target VM connects to the migration manager to get credentials to directly do disk transfers. So on the network side, the data only flows between the source and the target VM. It doesn't go through the migration manager, which allows it to be run for an entire environment. Like you can run it at one customer site that manages all of their clusters globally, and it doesn't matter that that the latency is not great and that there's not much bandwidth between migration manager and some sites. It's irrelevant. So that's another aspect that makes it scale quite well. Now, the tricky part with using migration manager is actually defining batches. In this case, I'm just selecting everything within one folder, but that's where in a production environment, a lot of thought needs to be put into. Like you probably only want to create a batch that selects a specific site, potentially, and then a subset of that site. Say you only want to select Ubuntu 24.4 instances that are running a database server that's in a pre-production environment on a specific physical site that only has one disk, no shared disk attached to it, and that's connected to a subset of network. So that's the kind of thing you can do with the pattern that you can configure. In this case, I just put the most basic one. But it lets you filter on basically every single property that is available on the VMware side to select just a subset of instances. We're also doing some more work to make that better. Like one piece of work is we want to make that filter easier to build through the web UI. We're also changing a few concepts around the batch right now. One is adding multiple maintenance windows. So instead of just that one window that's defined here, having potentially a dozen of them within one batch. And that's for a few different reasons. For one thing, we're going to be putting some throttling and quotas kind of in place so that if a batch has 50,000 VMs, you probably don't want to create 2,000 VMs at the same time on the exact same target cluster. Performance won't be great if you do that. So there will be some limits that can be placed on the source and target definition to limit concurrency. And so just that by itself, combined with how long of the maintenance window we're looking at, will force some of the instances to be pushed onto later maintenance windows. The other thing that we're adding is the concept of constraints. And constraints is a way to say, okay, well, I've got those 25,000 VMs that are selected, and that's fine. But some of those should not be shut down at the same time. And that's particularly important for any kind of clustered environment where, sure, you might have a pre-production environment. So you're trying to select all of that to move it together. But then you've got say a database cluster of 3 VMs. You don't want all 3 to go on at the same time. So constraints will be able to sort that out by saying if like any set of VMs that share this particular tag, so in this case, the tag could be the service name, cannot go down at the same time. And that will just naturally spread those 3 VMs over 3 maintenance windows. So that's another reason for like adding multiple maintenance windows is to also deal with more complex clustered services that need to be spread over multiple maintenance windows to avoid just taking the service down. So there's a bit of work there. It's what needs the most tweaking, but the good thing is that you can change the expression as you want and then go and check what's selected. Obviously, when dealing with very large set of instances, not so practical, but that's also why everything can be API driven, making it pretty easy to go look at that. The other thing is if we go look at the instance list, something else that's supported is resizing during migration. So there's ways to put some overrides on instances. And an override can also be a comment, so just like leaving a note for anyone else interacting with the tool, you can leave a note that way. you can mark a VM as this should not be migrated ever. Particularly useful for anything that you know is getting decommissioned, for example. It can just be flagged as disable migration, at which point it cannot be integrated, it cannot be pulled into a batch at all. And then for sizing, we can override both the number of CPUs and the amount of memory that a VM will get. The default is to match exactly what VMware has, but customers tend to have useful data can acquired over time that shows that, okay, well, a bunch of our VMs were allocated way too much resources and should be shrank. So then with our API, it's very easy to put all of those overrides in place. And when the VM actually does migrate, it's gonna come down with its initial resources, but come back up with reduced resources or increased resources, depending. All right. Let's look at where we're at. So a few of them did their initial transfers. So Debian LVM, CentOS 7, Debian Weird Partition, Oracle 9, and OpenSUSE. I think I'm actually pinging both Debian LVM and OpenSUSE here. So that's good. We'll be able to see what kind of downtime we look at in about 4 minutes from now when the actual maintenance window hits and those start doing that final migration. For the rest, anything that didn't do its first pass, by the time the maintenance window starts, it will keep on going. It will keep doing its current pass without shutting down the source VM. And then as soon as it's done the first pass, it will go and shut down the source VM and do the final pass. Obviously, if the maintenance window ends before it gets to that point, then they won't be shut down at all on the VMware side, and they will have to go onto a later maintenance window. Usually not really a problem because in production environments, you don't plan your batches maintenance windows 15 minutes ahead of time, like I did here. You normally go and plan those weeks ahead. So by that point, everything will have done several passes as far as transferring the disk, keeping things very, very short once we do actually get to the time for the maintenance window. So in the couple minutes we've got left before final migration, we can go look at maybe just GitHub and the project there. So as I said, Migration Manager is very much based on how we structured things with Incus. So it's written in Go. It uses most of the same concepts. The worker, so that runner image we have, is using makeOSI, very much like Incus OS. We're building artifacts and everything through GitHub Actions, and we're tracking most of the upcoming work through issues. So some of the rough edges on things like the UI, they've got those two are the relevant issues. There are a few other things that we're actively working on as far as polishes, and some bigger pieces that are being worked on right now. All right, and let's go see. So we can also check that, VMware on this side, we're still seeing snapshots being created and deleted. All of the VMs are powered on. So at this point, nothing happened there. If we go look at the Incus side, we can see they're still all running, and they're just running in their worker, like migration worker environment, to transfer data and to report back to Migration Manager. So at this point, nothing user visible has happened yet, but we're getting very close to the time where it will. So let's go, and we can also look at the CLI here. Just like I was looking at the UI, we can do the exact same from the CLI with QList. And in this case, we get to actually look at the time here. So we're about 10 seconds away from final migration starting for some of those VMs. And the rest will just keep on going with pre-migration and then go to final migration later on. All right, there we go. So we just hit the maintenance window, and we can see performing final import tasks on a bunch of them. They're all starting up. So they're going to be doing one last snapshot and transfer. And when that happens, they will also stop pinging, which we can see on these two, as they're as they're now being shut down during that last disk transfer, then running the post-migration tasks, and finally rebooting them back into the guest OS on Incus. So that doesn't take particularly long. It depends on the operating system, what tasks need to be run. We can see that one of the Debian is done, the other one is done too, and CentOS takes a bit longer because of the initRD, I think, but not by much. It's gonna also complete in the next few seconds. And yeah, some of those take a lot longer, like Oracle Linux 9, for example. It's got a lot of kernels pre-installed, so it takes a lot longer. And here we can see the first one is already back up. So that Debian VM, we were at sequence 1167 to 1232. So that's, what are we looking at? 70 seconds. So yeah, just over a minute, effectively in this case, to have that one shut down on VMware, do one last pass, inject the Incus agent, remove the VMware tools, regenerate the initRD for the right drivers, reboot. So that's pretty quick. Same thing now, we can see OpenSUSE had also just completed. That took longer. 1168 till 1247. It doesn't take that much longer, actually. I think it might have taken less time, actually. So anyway, that one also now completed. As you can see, both of them came back up with the exact same IP address. So it was pinging before, it's pinging after. Basically nothing, like anything that would have been running in that VM would just come back up and be perfectly happy, and everything is as it used to be, as far as it's concerned. Now, obviously the UI shows us the exact same thing, so we can see which ones have completed. We've got a few more that are now doing final migration. So Oracle Linux 9 is taking forever to do its post-migration. Oracle Linux 8 is about to start doing its last run and then post-migration. Ubuntu 22.04 is doing post-migration. That should be a pretty quick one. And Windows 2022 is almost complete. So I'm just gonna give Windows a tiny bit longer to actually complete, so we can show that moving to Incus as well. But otherwise, we're basically done. So if we look at the VMware side, we can see a bunch of them are now powered off. And we can actually see Windows 2022, it just did its final snapshot, and it's probably gonna go get powered off next as it completes that process. Yeah, Windows 2022 is now powered off. So that's being transferred. And if we check here, so it's currently injecting drivers effectively. And after that, it will reboot back on the Incus side. So actually, if we go look at Windows, what is it, 2022 data center, this guy, and console. Oh, okay, so I called it just as it was restarting. I would have liked to show that we were running effectively on Linux, and that now we're booting back up on Windows. But yeah, so that's a Windows VM that also got moved with the right drivers and everything being injected into it. And there we go, it just booted. And we can go check the network on that one to also show that it got its IP address back, and it's back to normal. Okay, so network settings is 8. Here we go, it's got its IP address, and we can see it's attached to a Virtio network adapter instead of a VMware one. So it just went through its migration as it moved to Incus. And that's basically it. There are a few more VMs that are still going through their process, most notably Windows 11, because they're huge and kind of slow to move. One thing that's kind of interesting, maybe with Windows 11 that you can see here, is we're testing a mix of setups. So we're testing Windows 11 without BitLocker, which usually moves just fine. Windows 11 with BitLocker enabled with a TPM key, and that's not been told that it needs to disable on next boot. That one will fail. So this case will actually fail with a clear error at the end saying that we can't do post-migration because BitLocker is currently on and not set in a way that works for migration. Whereas this one is in the state that we would expect for a Windows 11 VM being migrated, which is that the administrator ran a command to tell BitLocker to turn itself off for next boot. And then it re-enrolls after that. So that lets us move it from VMware to Incus. And then on next boot, BitLocker automatically re-enables and you're back to having that safety layer back on. For any VMs that we detect has a TPM, so all three of those for Windows 11, we automatically also put a VTPM on the Incus side, but obviously we can't pull the TPM state from one to the other, not that it would work anyways. So that's why BitLocker must be disabled just on one boot so that it can reset itself. And yeah, that's it for the current state of Migration Manager. It's definitely got still a few rough edges. We're working on documentation. We're working on a few other things to make it easier for others to jump in, start running it at home, start running it in development environments. But something pretty interesting to look at. And yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to leave them down below in the comment section. You can also, I believe we've got the discussion section enabled here on GitHub. So for more technical discussion threads, you can also go through that. And otherwise, yeah, all of the code is available. And whenever releases are tagged, we get the artifacts attached to it so that you can download that pretty easily. And that's it. Hopefully it was interesting. It's the first of the few projects that FuturFusion is working on that's now been fully released on GitHub, and definitely not going to be the last. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.